Whispers in Clay, you unearth cuneiform tablets where merchants complain about bad copper deliveries 4,000 years ago. Hey guys, tonight we're digging into voices the history books tried to bury, literally. Picture this. You're kneeling in the hot Mesopotamian dirt, brush in hand, dust stinging your eyes as you scrape away at a clay tablet older than the pyramids. Suddenly your fingers catch on grooves, not epic poetry or royal decrees, but a whiny merchant named Inasir complaining about getting ripped off on a copper shipment. The ingots you sent me are garbage, he writes, asterisk, and I will tell everyone in you are not to trust you. Asterisk 4,000 years later, and humanity's pettiness hasn't changed a bit. You probably wouldn't survive a day in Inasir's sandals, between the dysentery, the sunstroke, and the very real risk of getting stabbed over bad Yelp reviews. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Shout out to everyone watching from places where it's definitely past bedtime. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. These cuneiform tablets are history's first comment section. Thousands of receipts, complaints, and even divorce papers. One Babylonian woman tossed her husband out for being useless as a broken pot. But here's the quirky bit. Some tablets have tiny fingerprints pressed into the clay. Archaeologists argue whether they're from kids learning to write, or drunk scribes face-planting mid-contract. Historians still argue whether Inasir ever got his refund, but his bad Yelp review outlived empires. And then there's the fringe theory. A few tablets describe sky bronze falling from the heavens. Were they describing meteorite metal or just really good opium? Either way, these voices weren't meant for us. They were receipts tossed in a drawer, now whispering secrets through the cracks of time. You brush off another tablet. This one's a love poem. Your laughter is like sunlight on barley. Suddenly, the past isn't a parade of kings and battles. It's someone's heartbeat pressed into clay. 2. The library that never was. Alexandria's burn hides a twist. Its scribes might have smuggled scrolls to India. The year is 48 BCE, and you're standing on the docks of Alexandria, Egypt, as flames lick at the horizon. The legendary library is burning? Or is it? Here's the mainstream fact you know. Julius Caesar accidentally torched the place during his little civil war, wiping out a supposed 500,000 scrolls. But tonight we're digging deeper. Because what if I told you the librarian saw the fire coming and pulled off history's greatest sneak move? You're crouched in a hidden basement beneath the library's main hall, watching frantic scribes stuff priceless scrolls into waterproof reed cases. One worker, let's call him Taposiris because that's a name that deserves more airtime, is wrapping Aristotle's lost dialogues in linen like a burrito. The quirky twist? Some historians think these scrolls didn't just vanish, they took a boat ride. There are 2nd century Tamil poems in India that reference foreign wisdom from the West, and a few too many parallels between Greek geometry and ancient Sanskrit texts. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe Taposiris had a cousin in Madras with great storage space. Here's your reality check. You'd last about 3 minutes in ancient Alexandria before someone mugged you for your sandals or a philosopher bored you to death with lectures on geometry. Historians still argue whether the library's destruction was an accident or political arson. After all, knowledge is power, and power loves a good book burning. But the real scandal? The library might have already been declining before Caesar's barbecue moment. Late-period librarians were reportedly so busy arguing about how to categorize scrolls that they forgot to, protect them. Classic academia. Now let's talk fringe theories. A medieval Arab historian claimed some scrolls were smuggled to Constantinople. A 19th century adventurer swore he found papyrus fragments in a Moroccan cave with library catalog numbers still visible. And my personal favorite, there's a persistent myth that Cleopatra, yes, that Cleopatra, stashed the library's best hits in a secret underground annex beneath her palace. Archaeologists have found exactly zero evidence of this, but hey, a historian can dream. As the smoke clears over Alexandria, you spot one last scribe running toward the harbor with an armful of scrolls. He trips, the scrolls scatter, and just like that, Heron of Alexandria's blueprints for steam engines are blowing across the waves like seagull snacks. Somewhere, an alternate universe is cursing us for losing ancient robot technology. 3. Silenced by the conquerors, Cortes translators deliberately mistranslated Nahuatl poetry to make Aztec culture seem barbaric. The year is 1519, and you're standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid of Tenochtitlan as Emperor Moctezuma's poets recite verses about hummingbirds and cosmic war. Except, wait, that's not what they actually said. The words reaching your ears have been filtered through two Spanish translators with very different agendas. Meet La Malinche, the indigenous woman forced to bridge two worlds, and Geronimo de Aguilar, the shipwrecked priest who forgot half his Spanish. Together, they're about to perform history's most consequential game of telephone. You watch as Cortés leans in, listening intently as Moctezuma's poetic greeting, "You have come to sit upon your throne of jade," gets trimmed and twisted into, "He welcomes you as a god." Psst. That translation choice just gave Spain the perfect excuse for conquest. The mainstream fact? Spanish chronicles later claimed the Aztecs literally thought Cortés was Quetzalcoatl. The truth? Nahuatl scholars have since found the original poems. They were diplomatic niceties, not divine surrender. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some of the most beautiful Aztec poetry was actually insult comedy. Warriors would roast each other in verse before battles, and poets held rap battle-style competitions where losers got their heads shaved. Imagine if Eminem had faced that penalty. Historians still argue whether La Malinche deliberately softened Moctezuma's words to protect her people, or if de Aguilar's rusty Spanish just failed spectacularly. Now for the fringe theory. A 16th-century nun claimed to have found hidden Nahuatl codices where scribes drew Cortés with a jaguar mouth, secretly labeling him a predator. The documents vanished, but the metaphor bites deep. Meanwhile, modern linguists are using AI to scan surviving texts for translation scars. Phrases that awkwardly mirror Spanish grammar, betraying where colonial scribes altered the originals. As the last poets of Tenochtitlan are silenced, you spot a young scribe hurriedly scratching unaltered verses onto bark paper. He hides it under a floorboard, where it will wait 500 years for someone like you to listen. 4. Shipwreck Diaries, a 17th-century sailor's waterlogged journal reveals LGBTQ+ slang censored by Victorian archivists. The year is 1672, and you're clinging to the splintered mast of the Royal Fortune as it splits apart in a hurricane off Jamaica. Around you, sailors scream in languages you don't recognize, Portuguese, Akan, broken Dutch, but one voice cuts through the chaos. The ship's surgeon, a man named Thomas, is shouting his lover's name as the waves swallow him. His diary, sealed in a waxed leather pouch, will wash ashore 3 centuries later with a secret history tattooed in its margins. Mainstream history remembers pirates as cutthroat outlaws, but their personal writings tell a different story. Between notes on amputations and scurvy remedies, Thomas scribbled lyrics to a sea shanty that would make a Navy chaplain faint. "When we dock in Port Royal, meet me at the sign of the red scarf." It's not subtle. The quirky twist? Victorian archivists later cleaned up these journals, gluing pages together or blotting out immoral passages with ink. One prudish historian even wrote, "Nature abhors such vice" in the margins, right next to Thomas's tender poem about braiding his lover's hair. Here's the reality check. You wouldn't last a week on a Golden Age pirate ship. Between the maggoty biscuits and the 80% chance of dying by cannon fire or syphilis, the only healthcare plan was hope the rum numbs it. Historians still argue whether pirate ships were queer utopias or just violently pragmatic. When you're months at sea, strict heteronormativity tends to go overboard. Now for the fringe theory. Some scholars think the famous pirate accent, think, "R matey," was actually a coded dialect blending West African Pidgin, Gaelic and LGBTQ+ slang. A 1690s trial transcript records a pirate shouting "Molly ho" during a raid, possibly the era's equivalent of "Yas Queen." As Thomas's diary sinks into the seabed, saltwater blurring the words, "He kisses like a summer storm," you realize these weren't just criminals. They were people who carved out spaces to love and mourn in a world that wanted them erased. 5. The Black Caesar, pirate lore meets truth. An escaped slave built a Haitian fortress erased from maps. The year is 1805, and you're crouching in the mangroves of Île-Vache, Haiti, watching a man they called Black Caesar direct the construction of a fortress from stolen French cannons. His real name? Lost. His origins? A mystery wrapped in chains. Rumor says he was a Congolese prince sold into slavery who turned the tables by seizing his captor's ship mid-voyage. Now he's building something revolutionary, a pirate republic where escaped slaves make the rules. Mainstream history reduced him to a footnote, but the truth is wilder. Black Caesar didn't just attack ships. He redistributed them, turning captured vessels into floating emancipation proclamations. The quirky twist? His fortress walls were deliberately built crooked to confuse French artillerymen. Archaeologists found the ruins in 2012 and spent 3 years arguing whether the angles were genius or just bad masonry. Spoiler, it was genius. Here's your reality check. You'd be dead within hours in Caesar's world, between the French bounty hunters, the British Navy's shoot first, ignore questions later policy, and the very real chance of stepping on one of those sneaky mangrove crabs that pinch like hell. Historians still argue whether his fortress ever flew a flag, but Haitian oral tradition insists it was a red banner with a broken chain. Now for the fringe theory. Some say Caesar's raids funded Haiti's revolution under Toussaint Louverture. A British admiral's letter complains about a Negro pirate who dares to style himself Admiral of the Black, while a French plantation owner's diary wails that the very waves obey him. Romanticized? Maybe. But when researchers dived on a wreck near Isle Vache, they found a cannon engraved with a Sankofa symbol, a Ghanaian motif meaning go back and fetch it. Coincidence? Caesar wouldn't think so. As the fortress falls to French bombardment, you spot a boy scrambling up the cliffs with a sack of Caesar's maps, charts that'll later guide escaped slaves to the Bahamas. The Navy calls him a criminal. The enslaved call him captain. 6. Buried protest songs. Mongol women hid feminist lyrics and throat-singing harmonics to bypass Genghis censors. The year is 1227, and you're sitting cross-legged in a yurt on the Mongolian steppe as a woman named Alagai belts out a throat-singing melody that vibrates your ribcage. To the occupying officials it's just folk music, but the older women wink as they join in. Hidden in the harmonics are lyrics that would get them executed if spoken aloud. The Khan's horses are fast, but his wives run faster. Mainstream history paints Mongol women as silent figures in the background, but their protest songs traveled further than any empire. The quirky twist? They encoded subversive messages using harmonic overtones, singing one pitch while their throat produced another, creating a musical cipher. To untrained ears, like the Khan's tax collectors, it sounded like aimless humming. To the initiated? A survival guide disguised as a lullaby. Here's your reality check. You wouldn't last a single winter in Alagai's world. Between the minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures, the fermented mare's milk that tastes like battery acid, and the very real chance of getting trampled by a spooked horse during a covert singing session. Historians still argue whether Genghis Khan knew about the songs and tolerated them, or if his spies just had terrible pitch. Now for the fringe theory. Some ethnomusicologists believe these songs influenced Tibetan nuns centuries later, who hid feminist teachings in overtone chanting. A 14th century monk's journal complains about women who buzz like angry bees when they should be silent. Which honestly, is the best review of protest music ever. As Alagai teaches her granddaughter to layer, "The land belongs to the grandmothers" beneath a hunting song, you realize these weren't just tunes. They were sonic seeds, planted deep, waiting to bloom when the ground was softer. 7. The year is 3200 BCE, and you're watching a toddler in the Indus Valley press their tiny fingers into wet clay, not writing, just joyful chaos. But those mistakes hold a secret. Fast forward to 2023, where linguists are feeding similar scribbles into an AI, hunting for the ghost of Proto-Indo-European, the mother tongue of half the world's languages. Mainstream science calls it the drunken monkey theory, that our first words were just random grunts. But here's the quirky twist. Toddlers across ancient civilizations made the same errors in early writing systems. A Sumerian kid's backwards cuneiform A looks eerily like a Viking child's botched rune. AI now suggests these weren't mistakes, but fossilized remnants of older, shared sounds. Here's your reality check. You'd be hopeless trying to learn Proto-Indo-European. Imagine explaining to a Stone Age parent that their kid's doodles contain the blueprint for Sanskrit, Greek, and the word taxes. Historians still argue whether it sounded like guttural growls or melodic hums, but the AI's best guess is a mix of both, with bonus wolf howls. Now for the fringe theory. Some researchers claim to have found proto-words hidden in cave paintings. Those handprints beside the bison? Not art, spelling lessons. One controversial linguist insists the Lascaux caves contain a 17,000-year-old version of "Don't eat the purple berries." As the AI reconstructs a sentence, "The Sky Father rides the storm bull," you realize those ancient toddlers weren't scribbling. They were time travelers sending us messages in the only language that outlasts empires: childhood. 8. Burned but not gone. Timbuktu's librarians saved 300,000 manuscripts by hiding them in goatskin tubes. The year is 2012, and you're standing in a basement in Timbuktu as a librarian named Abdul Qadir Haidara stacks goatskin tubes into a wheelbarrow. Outside, jihadist trucks rumble through the streets, torching any book that doesn't fit their narrow worldview. But Haidara's not panicking. He's done this before. For centuries, his family has protected 300,000 manuscripts by doing the unthinkable, hiding them in plain sight. Mainstream media called it a rescue mission, but the truth is grittier. These manuscripts, containing everything from 14th-century feminist poetry to advanced astronomy, had survived by being disguised as firewood, goat feed, and even coffins. The quirky twist? Some were hollowed out with fake Quranic verses painted on the outside, like intellectual matryoshka dolls. Here's your reality check. You'd fold faster than a wet manuscript in Haidara's shoes, between the 120 degrees Fahrenheit heat, the constant threat of raids, and the very real chance of getting bitten by a scorpion nesting in a 500-year-old math treatise. Historians still argue whether the most valuable text, a woman's 1393 prenup demanding equal hours for study and child-rearing, was smuggled to safety or burned. Now for the fringe theory. Rumor says one tube contained blueprints for a medieval hot air balloon, based on a Songhai emperor's dream of flight. No physical evidence exists, but in 2013, a Tuareg nomad reported finding strange silk scraps in a cave, stitched with diagrams of fire baskets. As Haidara wheels his precious cargo toward the Niger River, you spot a teenage volunteer slip a modern USB drive into a goatskin tube, because some traditions can't end with parchment.